Okay, we will now make a start. Again, thank you for joining this session. Just to confirm, the webinar is being recorded and that will be sent out to everyone once we've been able to pull that down from the cloud. So anybody in attendance or anybody who has registered and is unable to attend will receive a copy of this particular recording. As we work through the session, if you do have any questions that spring to mind, please drop them into the Q&A section, and we will do our utmost to ensure those are covered either live in this session, or we will subsequently download all questions, send them through to Carmel, who will provide responses to each and every question that we receive. So today, this is our second Learning Lab session for the year. 2020 has been an odd year, so we've missed a couple, unfortunately, but we're hoping now that we're back on track with this regular quarterly occurrence from Lee Hecht Harrison today and Payroll HQ. The topic for today is leadership accountability, with a focus on people and also the impact that it has on payroll. Leadership accountability is so critical within any organisation, no matter how small or how large, and the accountability that leaders have, not just for their people, but ensuring that their people are paid correctly, has played out over the last couple of years, certainly locally here in Australia. So joining us on this session today is Carmel Batticciotto from Lee Hecht Harrison. She is their regional lead for their talent business. Lee Hecht Harrison are a global leader in the talent space, and she has a remit for the Asia Pacific region. So we're delighted that she's been able to find time from her busy schedule to spend 30 minutes with us this afternoon on the topic of leadership accountability. So without further ado, you'll hear less from me and more from Carmel. Carmel.
Thank you, Ross. So really excited to be here today talking about, a topic I'm very passionate about, being leadership and specifically leadership accountability. So I've been working within the field of organizational psychology for well over 10 years, and a lot of that time has been spent working with a range of leaders, but also researching, what makes a good leader. And today, what we're going to focus on is leadership accountability and how that impacts payroll, and also talking about the payroll debacle and how that's been in the news of late. So we have 30 minutes ahead of us. I do tend to get a bit excited, so I really hope I can stick to the 30 minutes. Otherwise, we might get the Oscar music wrapping me up. So what we plan to run through today are a range of discussion topics. So firstly, always like to kick off every session with a bit of a definition so that we're all clear on what we're actually focusing on. So we'll start off with looking into what is an accountable leader, and what does accountable leadership look like. We will then talk about the leadership accountability gap, which results from a research study conducted by LHH globally. And then we will talk about leaders and compliance, and talk a little more about the behaviours that might or might not be driving a compliance or risk management culture. We'll then talk about the impact on COVID on all of this. And we will finish off with talking about, well, what are some things that we can do to ensure that there is an improved focus on compliance. And as Ross mentioned, hopefully we have some time for questions at the end. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to respond to any questions that you might have post-session. So let's jump into it. So what does it take to be a truly accountable leader, and why are we even talking about accountable leadership? Well, as I mentioned, LHH have conducted a number of research studies, both globally and locally, and we've done this to investigate the factors of effective leadership. And time again, leadership accountability has emerged as a key factor of leadership success. and it's been found to drive performance. So for organizations who are wanting to build their capacity in this area, it's always worth knowing what we've found to be the key behaviors that differentiate accountable leaders from the rest of the pack. And again, when we were looking through our research, we found that industry leading companies that did have these, this high accountable leadership culture, their leaders definitely demonstrated these behaviors as well. So it was consistent with our research. So what do these behaviors look like? The first is around holding others accountable for high standards of performance. So being very clear on the outcomes that are needing to be achieved, and also how that leader will support individuals and take accountability for that standard of performance as well, rather than just having the mindset of, well, this is what you need to achieve. Now, go ahead and do it. I'll leave you to do that independently, but if you fail, it's all on you. It's about shared responsibility of that performance. The second area is about tackling tough issues and making difficult decisions. And this is a theme that we see across industries constantly coming up in regards to leadership development. It's not an area that we generally are comfortable in, and leaders are at the forefront of having to make these decisions and have those difficult conversations. So it's a critical behavior. Effectively communicating the strategy throughout the organization. So again, providing that clarity of what are we trying to achieve as an organization, but also inspiring their people to go on that journey with them and be really clear on what that future vision and future destination is that they're trying to get to. The fourth is around expressing optimism about the company and its future. So again, taking a bit of a positive psychology slant on this. Leaders who are more optimistic are generally deemed to be more successful because, again, they can inspire their people to go on that journey with them. And finally, displaying clarity about external trends in the business environment. So we've talked about clarity a couple of times through these behaviors, and this relates more to understanding the industry that you are in and how those trends can impact your organization. And what we're seeing a lot of at the moment is how that can actually impact the workforce of the future and roles and skills required through the impact of automation and so forth. So we know that leadership accountability is important, and we've talked about the critical behaviours of an accountable leader. So now we're going to look at how organisations measure up, and specifically how Australian organisations measure up. So within the research study that I mentioned, we actually surveyed a range of organisations across industries on what leadership accountability looked like for them and their satisfaction with that. And you'll see up here on the screen that 87.5% of respondents reported that they believed leadership accountability is a critical business issue. However, only 29% were satisfied with the level of leadership accountability in their organisations. So yeah, a little bit of a startling stat. And really this does highlight the frustration that many individuals are experiencing, where they're acknowledging that it's an important issue, but they're just not seeing leaders cultivate that culture of accountability. And something else to note is that in regards to these being Australian results, we actually had the largest gap globally between the level of satisfaction and the level of importance that was noted. So we definitely do have a leadership accountability gap that we need to address here locally. And another finding of the study is that top performing organisations had a direct relationship with having higher levels of leadership accountability. So another area to focus on is, we've talked about the behaviours of leaders, but there's also an expectation around what leaders need to achieve in the current environment. And this is ever changing, as we know. So leaders need to commit to leading transformation, and that change leadership capability is a theme that keeps coming up for leaders, not only today, but into the future of the work. They need to leave the organization better than they found it. And really, this is about improving capability within the business and developing others. It's a really important responsibility of leaders that isn't always fulfilled. They need to tackle those tough issues that hold the organization back. Again, that is linked to one of those critical behaviors of an accountable leader. And this includes demonstrating curiosity to ensure that organizations are doing the right thing, and sometimes having to have tough conversations about that. And, specifically relating that to being compliant with legislation and ensuring that risk is appropriately managed. That, is a hot topic. And building strong cultures. So leaders have the strongest impact on culture, and they need to build this culture of accountability and also promote a climate of positive well-being and safety amongst their people. However, we continue to see a lack of leadership accountability in our market. So we've seen neglectful and high-risk leadership behaviours in the news time and time again, whether it's due to royal commissions or various scandals. And here's an example of one of those scandals. So the underpayment scandal. And you've all seen in the news the story of George Calombaris and Dominos, and we have Coles and Target there on the list, WH Smith being another recent offender. It's a serious situation. And as we've investigated this further, what we've found is that leaders haven't paid attention to the less sexy topic of payroll and thinking it's enough to just assume that their organization is payroll compliant. However, payroll is a complex and high-risk topic. So, as we've seen this continuously pop up in the news, we've looked into, well, why is this continuously happening? And from a payroll perspective, we need to understand that there's well over 100 changes to payroll legislation each year. There are over 120 payroll awards in Australia. And the consequences are tough. So last year alone, Fair Work recovered over 123.4 million in unpaid wages. So you can imagine the fines that are associated with that, let alone employer and personal brands destroyed, as we see the example of George Calombaris. And it's an interesting topic, because when I looked into the research around leaders and compliance, that compliance or risk management mindset isn't necessarily associated with leaders or typical leadership mindsets. And if you think about it, leaders are usually asked to be responsible for driving the vision, driving innovation, setting and driving the strategy. So again, not necessarily associated with the types of behaviors and mindset that you need for compliance or risk management. And you'll see a couple of stats here that I found interesting. Up to 3,000 executives were interviewed for Ernst & Young's 2016 Global Fraud Survey, and 42% said they could justify unethical behaviour in order to meet financial targets. So it's that constant focus of, I have demands from an organisational point of view, I have targets I need to achieve, I need to achieve the future vision of the organisation, and that's not always necessarily aligning to, I need to manage risk, we need to be compliant and do the right thing as an organisation. There's been other research that's demonstrated that leaders are actually more susceptible to non-compliance behaviours and are actually more willing to fail to comply. And again, it's because that loyalty to the organisation and what the organisation needs them to achieve, that they're sometimes being a little bit more flexible on their individual principles. And we also saw the results of the Banking Royal Commission, where leaders played a critical role in that, where they were actually driving a culture where they were not accountable to their end clients or ensuring that they were doing the right thing by them. And in investigating that, what was found is that a lot of leaders were so focused on achieving the bottom line and achieving their performance targets that they did so at the risk of avoiding compliance issues, of basically not worrying about risk management. And another area that we need to consider now is COVID. Like, has this created another distraction for leaders? So the payroll scandals have faded into the background a little with COVID updates every day. And I'm sure we all, want to know more about how many cases we've had. I'm actually based in Melbourne, so I religiously check every day for fear that we're going to be put down in lockdown again soon and I can't go past my letterbox. So, all of that has taken over and has pushed things like the Banking Royal Commission and our learnings from that, the payroll scandals and our learnings from that into the background. And leaders have lots of competing priorities at the moment. I mean, just worrying about moving their workforce into a virtual working environment, making sure that individuals are engaged, connected, still being productive. That alone is really taking up a lot of time from a leadership perspective. Impact of JobKeeper is something else to consider. So that's adding another layer of complexity and compliance. And what we may find is that in a few months' time or a year's time, there may be JobKeeper scandals. So are leaders possibly taking advantage of JobKeeper and not necessarily worrying about the risk or the consequences, rather than being focused on managing that risk and doing the right thing. And from a Fair Work perspective, I mean, they've seen a huge increase in demand for their services. So since mid-March, the average number of calls to their info line per day has increased by 40% through COVID. So again, in regards to salary payments and JobKeeper and all of that type of thing, that is going to add another layer of complexity. And well-being, I mean, that's a significant focus at the moment. Leaders, organizations are worried about the well-being of their people. They're worrying about their resilience levels, burnout levels, as we find we're working even harder in a work from home environment. But what we're finding, and this is across our client base, is that there tends to be a focus only on the element of possibly physical well-being and mental well-being levels. However, as leaders, we actually need to think about all elements of well-being. So Ross, if you could just please, there we go. So Gallup have invested a lot of research into well-being and found that there are a number of different elements of well-being that contribute to our overall well-being. And while leaders are generally tending to focus on the social piece, possibly the physical piece, the financial element component is equally as important. So if we look at this in relation to payroll as an example, by paying people the right amount, by looking after their financial well-being, we're actually contributing to their overall well-being. Even from a career perspective, careers are very closely identified with our overall identity, and again help to have a significant impact on overall well-being. So although well-being is the buzzword at the moment, we really do need to think about all elements and not just those that might be the most obvious to us at the time, such as resilience and so forth. So in looking at what we actually can do, so we've identified a range of factors, a range of scandals that is showing us that this is a problem. And if we look at the, a natural skill set of a leader, they may not necessarily be focused on compliance and risk management. And the Royal Commission has certainly showed us how leaders have not always asked the right questions to ensure that they are doing the right thing. So what can we do to help increase this focus on compliance and on risk management? So there's a number of areas that we can focus on. The why is always so important because leaders are busy. Leaders have so many different priorities. We've talked about how COVID has increased those priorities. So we need them to understand what's in it for me. Why should they care as a leader? And this is an opportunity to really link the, doing the right thing to the values of your organization, but also the health of your organization and your employer brand. Because as we know, if you're not focusing on compliance, it could be your organization that's the next one in the news for an underpayment scandal, or if there's a royal commission in regards to your industry, again, you could be caught out for doing the wrong thing. So, from a values perspective, you're not looking after your people, you're not looking after your clients. And, that is a strong message to be sending to leaders. Also, we know that what gets measured gets done. So KPIs could be something that you look to introduce for leaders. Is there something around possibly audits, so performance of audits or number of non-compliant areas in the business? Could that be linked to KPIs for your leaders, so that also adds to the what's in it for me messaging? It's also important to ensure that high-risk compliance topics are actually discussed at meetings. So whether it's senior leadership meetings or whatever that forum looks like, we need to get these topics on the agenda so that leaders are not just assuming that everything's being done right, but they're asking the right questions. They're reviewing the right level of data perhaps in these meetings to ensure that everyone is responsible and demonstrating their accountability for these areas within the business. There's also the opportunity to conduct regular audits or health checks. Again, so you're not just taking for granted that everything's okay and we're doing the right thing. I mean, we mentioned earlier how many different changes there are to legislation each year from a payroll perspective. So how do you make sure that you're on top of those? Whistleblower culture. So this is really about the fact that everybody leads and it's not just the responsibility of leaders. And we work with a lot of clients who are in high risk environments from a safety point of view. And what we've found works really well with them is that they've encouraged a culture where it's everybody's it's everybody's responsibility to identify a safety risk. So if I'm walking through the hallway and I see a ladder where it shouldn't be or whatever it might be, I make sure that I go to the right person and I let them know about that. I don't just walk past and think, oh, I'm sure that the OH&S manager will see that and fix it. So it's really important to communicate to everyone that everybody leads, it's everybody's responsibility, and to increase awareness of what they should be watching out for, and the types of questions that they should be asking to hold each other to account. And finally, being really clear on accountability and responsibilities. So even though certain compliance topics may be the responsibility of a particular department, the accountability is with everyone, and especially senior leadership, because they are in a position of authority and hold so much influence over these areas. So ensuring that that is absolutely clear is critical as part of this. And so, yeah, just to close off, there are a range of areas that we have suggested in regards to what can be done to improve the compliance mindset. However, an important message is that this is an ongoing journey. So another thing that doesn't work are one-off training events to get people to be more focused on compliance or procedures. So it's really important that the ongoing conversations are happening within your organization to see what you can improve on a continuous basis.
Thank you, Carmel. We are going to pause, and if you do have a question that you would like to ask, now is a great time to do so in that Q&A box. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to pop a question in there, and we will do our best to answer. Carmel, just a question from me to you. Of those 20, of the respondents to your survey locally here in Australia, what was the profile? Was it across the business, or was it particularly within the HR and finance area, like the profile of the individuals responding to that?
Yeah, so they were across HR and leaders from middle management up to senior levels.
Okay. And in relation to that survey, is that something that participants of this session can download from somewhere?
Definitely. Now, I'm not sure whether it can be downloaded, but I can definitely share that with you, Ross, to
Yep.
be distributed if that helps.
Okay. So if anybody on the call would like a copy of the outputs of the survey, please drop me an email to ross@payrollhq.com.au, and I will grab a copy from Carmel and send that on to you. I find it quite fascinating in that when you described Carmel about a business and kind of focusing on that end client, or sorry, not focusing on the end client and being more focused on themselves. I think when you look at payroll, it's a critical business function that every business needs to perform, but it isn't part of their core strategy. So it often gets overlooked. And the underpayment press that has been playing out for the last couple of years, my own personal view is someone hasn't made a conscious decision to underpay anybody. The failing of leaders within the types of organizations has been directly linked to not asking the right questions. So it's that common set and forget mentality. We've got a platform, we've got a process, it's working, we don't need to ask any more questions. Whereas if questions had been getting asked at an exec level on a quarterly or biannual basis, that the payroll function was providing financial well-being and it was, paying accurately period on period, then organizations could continue to function and can continue to deliver what was entitled to their employees, their talent base, on an ongoing basis. So I think it's just the ability to ask the right questions from my perspective, leaders actually taking a little bit more responsibility for what might be viewed as a non-core function, but is actually a critical business function. And when you get it wrong, it has significant impact on staff morale, your brand, etc., etc.
That's right. Yeah. And another thing that we've seen, Ross, related to that is as a result of the Royal Banking Commission. We support organisations through reskilling, and we're seeing a huge demand from the financial services in reskilling in the areas of risk. So that's an interesting theme if you consider the findings of the Royal Commission in financial services.
Thank you. So we're at the top of the hour. It is 1:30. I'd just like to take a quick moment to thank you all for attending this quarter's Learning Lab session. If anybody wants to reach out to Carmel at Lehecht Harrison, there are details. I've given everybody my email address, so feel free to get in touch with me, or if it's just a general inquiry to Payroll HQ, you can flick that through to hello@payrollhq.com.au, and you'll hear from one of our talented team. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe, and thanks again. Thanks, Carmel.
Thank you.